I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today, we're talking with singer-songwriter Cyrena Wages about her debut album, so stay with us for a conversation with Cyrena. Welcome back. Thanks for being here.
What's up? Thank you for having me.
You know, when I was writing this down, and we'll talk about the album, which comes out in May, but people can start ordering in February, and we'll talk about all that. I knew but didn't know this is your debut album, because you've been performing and singing and playing music for quite some time now, but you hadn't done an album.
Yeah, I've been a member of so many bands over the years, but 2020 was sort of the mark of this whole new venture, the beginning of this whole new venture for myself. So this is my first solo artist album ever.
That's great. Congratulations.
Crazy. Thank you.
Lovely, and it's cool, and it's kind of funny in parts.
Good.
And we'll talk some about it as best we can, as interesting as it is to describe an album that people can't listen to yet. And there's this really great part here. But you were nice enough to ask me to do a thing at Listening Lab in Crosstown. Yes. So we'll make sure we mention that to people. It's Feb 1 at 6:30 in the Listening Lab at Crosstown with you and Matt Ross-Spang, the producer, produced this album, runs Southern Grooves, is just an acclaimed, people by all accounts.
Yeah, native Memphian himself. So
so that's something people can just show up on Feb 1 at 6:30. They'll get some teases of the album, be playing in the Listening Lab, and you and Matt are going to talk and answer questions that I am going to pose. And we're going to run through all those questions and rehearse the answers today.
Anything could happen. You never know.
Anything could happen. But you're nice enough to let me do that. For people, you talk about your career, and we've talked before. You've been in bands. You had a period of time where you were more country music focused. Mm-hmm. You don't like to talk about that. I have this feeling, so I'm going to keep asking questions and just kind of see how we get
anything
that.
Is up for
Talk about your career. I mean, and you've been touring a bunch this fall, all these different bands. It is fascinating to me. I love when I get to interview musicians and songwriters, that this life is not an easy life, but it is a very cool life.
Yeah, in so many ways. So I'm from here. I grew up out in Millington, which I always have to be very specific when I say that, because my dad gets really mad when I don't mention Millington and I say Memphis. But grew up out near Shelby Forest. Grew up singing and never really was a writer till many years later, but was singing all over the place. Wherever they'd give me a microphone on a stage, that was my thing for sure. But I moved to Nashville when I was 18, and over the next 10 years, I was a part of various Nashville-based bands. And so I've put out projects over the years. I've also, been signed to deals where projects were made and then shelved. And it was this very tumultuous, very interesting, very classic sort of Nashville story that I feel like I sort of fell into the system and then was able to fight my way out of the system about the same time that I decided to move back to Memphis. And when I moved back to Memphis at the very end of 2019, I kind of planned on splitting time between here and there and sort of keeping my previous band projects running a bit. But then, of course, COVID happened. So that derailed everything. And for me creatively, though, it actually was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It forced me to ask myself why I started doing this in the first place, and if I was going to continue to pursue this like somewhat masochistic career, that I was going to have to do it from a place that felt really fruitful and honest and earnest and authentic. And so I always say that I kind of, in my music and in my personal life, like took the bookshelf and just shook it really hard and everything fell off. And then I've slowly and methodically over the years started to decide what to put back on the shelf. Yeah. And that happened for me sort of personally and professionally in this artistic pursuit. So it is my first album as a solo artist. And it kind of feels like for the first time, even though, I'm not a kid, I've been doing this for quite some time, but it feels like this is the first time that I'm doing it from my actual honest voice. And it feels really good and really vulnerable, but it feels right,
When you talk about on the professional side, when you talk about the things you should, I love that analogy or that image. What are some of those things you didn't put back on the bookshelf professionally?
Yeah. So when I started this all in Nashville, I had a very, naive, but also understandable mindset that I sort of had to do whatever the industry or the suits, some might say, told me to do just to get my foot in the door, right? And that's not necessarily wrong. I think that if I would have been a bit more malleable, it might have been even more helpful. But I sort of just acquiesced my artistic instincts to fit what I thought could be successful. And I did that for so many years. And in ways it worked and in ways it didn't, because super cliche and overly simplistic to say, but there's always somebody better at doing that thing that you aren't actually true to. You know, if you're trying to to chameleon into this thing, there's somebody else who's actually truly in that space and in that essence that's going to be able to do it better. And so, I feel like I just kind of became another product on the conveyor belt, partly because of the way the industry works, but also partly because of my own, sort of like desperation to figure out how to make a career work for myself. I just didn't have the sense of self emotionally, personally, or artistically that I do now. And all I knew is that I wanted to be an artist so bad and I wanted to tell a story, but I didn't know how to, embody my agency enough to do that in the way that I'm able to do it now. Yeah. So you kind of get put in the system and then get spit out of the system, and it's heartbreaking and confusing, but it's like also so great to be on the other side of that hard lesson learned. Yeah. Do you
regret it?
Regret is such a layered word, it's like
I actually honestly hate that word.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sad for myself that I feel like I lost so many years to something that was never going to serve me. But at the same time, the feeling of losing years is all conditioning, right? Like I got plenty of time. We all do.
Right.
So if I can kind of wipe that mindset out of here and just look at how much I've learned. It's such a lessons life, and I learned so much, and I am kind of a completely different person on the other side of that experience. Yeah. So
let me remind everyone, we're talking to Cyrena Wages, singer-songwriter. Her debut album is coming out in May, but there is a listening preview at Listening Lab on February 1st at 6:30 to 8:30. Matt Ross-Spang, who produced the album, will be there. You and Joe Restivo, who played on the album, will be doing a couple of acoustic songs, right, in the Listening Lab. People don't need tickets. They just need to show up. And I am going to do some sort of moderating. We're going to have a very formal panel with like name cards. Yeah. Really, I don't know what we're going to do. But we'll talk about some of these things and talk Matt, tell his story.
Could get wild. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. Matt Ross-Spang is obviously just sort of beloved and kind of, I mean, not just locally now, but nationally, internationally, right? What was it? Did you know him, and you known him for a long time? I mean, how did that come about?
So I never knew him personally, but I, even when I was living in Nashville, I would try to keep my finger on the pulse of what was happening in Memphis, because it's so clearly, Memphis is, the coolest city in the world to me, and it's my home, but there just wasn't as much of an industry for up and coming songwriters here to work and to record as there is now. So, but I would keep my finger on the pulse of what was happening in Memphis and who was really doing it, and who was making these things possible for artists from Memphis and from artists who would travel through Memphis. And I just always had a creative crush on Matt Ross-Spang. Never knew him, but just kind of kept my eye on what he was doing, and was a huge fan of the projects he was working on. And and so finally, after Joe Restivo, who became my like musical brother when I first moved back to Memphis, actually slid into his DMs on Instagram and manipulated him into having a coffee with me until I could then trick him into writing songs with me.
I'm sure there was not that much manipulation.
Becoming my musical director and whatnot. But yeah, so he and I wrote most all of these songs together, and many others that didn't make the record, but we wrote these songs over the last couple of years and have played about 1,000 gigs together. And Joe said, I think Matt would dig this project. And another thing that I'd kind of learned from my Nashville years is like to not have expectations at all.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And
because you'll be just disappointed, and sometimes it's not personal, sometimes it's not a good fit. Some of the time, or sometimes it's really personal and really ugly, or whatever. Just wall that.
It could be any number of those things, and I'm the overly analytical type that would split the hairs and attach a lot of meaning to every rejection. So that was another thing that I'd kind of tried to part with after my Nashville experience was just. And once again, this isn't an anti-Nashville thing when I say Nashville. Industry. But that young girl's experience of a very competitive and complicated industry is what I mean. But so I tried to part ways with really any kind of expectation, even if someone promises you the sun, moon, and stars. So I was like, Matt might like it, whatever. Kind of blew it off. And then he did. We got to meet with him. I think this was right before his studio, Matt's studio over at Crosstown was complete. And so he was working out of Sam Phillips one day. And we went over there and played some songs for him acoustically. And I remember the one song that was my personal favorite, but that I was afraid wouldn't make the cut for the 10 was Matt's favorite that day. And I felt so seen and heard. And I felt like he got it. Which song?
So I've gotten to listen. You sent me in advance, so you sent it to me back in the fall. I think. Anyway, so I've had it for a while. But which song was that?
So it's the last song on the record. It's called "Back to the City," and it's definitely it's not your single. It's not your sing along in the car kind of vibe. But it was just a little poem that I'd written one day across the street from where we are right now. At my old apartment. And it just was deeply personal. It was like a little diary entry, but it has this very classic melody that I feel really proud of. And Matt got it that day, and it was the first time we'd ever played it for anyone. And I just got so excited. And once again, even after he said, "Okay, let's do this," I thought, I'll probably never hear from him again because that's just the way it goes, And then I did. And so in a series of many different sessions over many months of the last couple years, we ended up cutting the full 10 songs with Matt.
Okay. That was going to be one of my questions. If it was all just like one intense week, but it was over time. But let's come back to that. I want to do a little housekeeping. Again, remind everyone, if you tuned in late.
Whatever.
Whatever. We're with Cyrena Wages today, singer-songwriter. Her debut album comes out February 1st. It comes out in May, but on February 1st from 6:30 to 8:30 at the Listening Lab in Crosstown. You can listen to it in Crosstown. There'll be a conversation with you and Matt Ross-Spang, and you and Joe Restivo are going to play a couple of songs acoustically. So again, you don't need tickets. Just show up February 1st at the Listening Lab. I should also give a shout out to there are just a lot of drinks. There's a lot of drinks there.
I'm a Wages from Millington. We like to throw a party. You know what I mean?
I'm in. So Blue Note, Milagro, Hendrix, and Reka Vodka are all sponsoring. So, but let me also just take a second and remind everyone, this is The Sidebar. I'm Eric Barnes. The Sidebar airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. We're talking about the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's also one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Memphis Grizzlies podcast, the Memphis Tigers podcast, our food podcast, Soundbites, that's hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield, and also airs here on WYXR every Thursday at 11. All of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site, as well as iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get this show and Soundbites on WYXR.org or download the WYXR app. You can listen to all the shows, talk, and music at WYXR. And do consider becoming a supporter of WYXR if you haven't already. It is nonprofit, listener-supported radio. So become a member, donate. You can do all that through WYXR.org. Recently, we had Tim Barker of Edge Alley, who has ruined my life completely by closing Edge Alley. I told him that, and he had no excuses. But actually, it was really interesting to talk to Tim about just the restaurant, the landscape, and the 7 years that Edge Alley was open. And it was a place very close to many people who loved Edge Alley. It was kind of a way of life for them. And so when Tim shut it down, it was bittersweet. So it was fun to talk to him. Coming up soon, we've got Lakeisha Edwards from the Urban Arts Commission and Rory Thomas from Memphis Medical District Collaborative. I should also highlight Behind the Headlines that we do with the folks over at WKNO. We recently had County Mayor Lee Harris on. We're doing a show on the big North Side High redevelopment. Also, Kevin Ritz, the U.S. attorney's coming on, and a group of legislators will come on as well, talking about the session in Nashville that just got it started. Last bit of housekeeping, the Daily Memphian has its next Women in Business seminar coming up on February 28th at 3:30 at the Botanic Garden. Also happens to be my birthday, so if you come bring gifts. I don't know. But again, Women in Business, we've got Carol Coletta, Pat Mitchell-Worley, and Chloe Sexton of Bluff Cakes will all be there on a panel. It'll be great. It's always one of the best of the seminars we do. It's really the best of the seminars we do. So go to Eventbrite, search for Daily Memphian. You'll find a way to buy tickets to that and be there for February 28th at 3:30. But again, we're here with Cyrena Wages talking about her debut album. I haven't said the name of it. I just, I sort of realized there's a kind of DJ thing that I'm just totally screwing up here. I did the sponsors. I've reintroduced you. I've done the date 3 times and I've yet to name the album.
But you're so good at it.
You're very nice. You're very nice.
A lot of information and a little amount.
A lot of it's written down.
Yeah.
So actually the fact that it's written down makes it inexcusable the amount of times I screw up doing things that are written down in front of me. But anyway, the album is called Vanity Project, right? And then I was like, oh, I'm going to screw it up. But it was recorded. So when, give or take, when did you start and over, how did that whole process work?
Oh my gosh. I think we started the first session a little less than 2 years ago now, which is kind of crazy. But, when you're not working with a label and you're sort of self-funding these things, that's one of the hurdles, but also just time and being able to get in with Matt. He's very high in demand,
Yeah.
And, but yeah, we started about 2 years ago, and I'm so glad that we actually kind of drug this out unintentionally, because through it, I evolved and changed and grew musically. And so if we would have rushed and done all of those sessions, in April of, what was that, what year is it? I don't know, 2 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Then I think it would have been a different project than it is now.
Yeah.
And it's always that way, right? Like, I'm sure when you get done with a book or a piece that you look back and you go, wow, I would do it so differently now.
Oh, yes. It's horrifying, actually, sometimes.
And then you still have to go out there and sell it to the world, even though you're like, oh my gosh, I would do this totally different. But I'm glad that, parts of the record were done more recently, because I kind of got to really come into myself and learn what I was trying to make as I was making it.
Yeah, because during this time, it can't be underestimated how much you've been playing with, you mentioned it, but just other people been touring, doing gigs. I mean, you've been all over the place, back in Nashville, back regional. So it has not been, not that there would be anything wrong with this, but it hasn't been that this, 2-year period, this has been by any means your only project. Like you said, you've been playing these songs live. You've been
100%.
doing all these different things.
I mean, I think like I said, once I sort of consider it, I think I had kind of a wake up at around 26 when I sort of felt like I may have mentioned this in our last podcast, but I felt like I'd been asleep my entire life, really. And I woke up and realized that I was putting myself out there musically, and I was, creatively saying to the world I wanted to be part of all these projects and whatnot, but I had no idea what the real well I was drawing from was. And so, this last couple of years has been a coming to terms with myself and what I really want, and a crash course in how to grow up really fast. And so that has also involved playing 1 billion shows. And I'll say,
if people follow you on Instagram, you have this fascinating Instagram account, and it's a 1 billion shows, give or take. It just seems constant.
It's constant, and it's silly. It's like, drive 24 hours in 2 days to play a show that you lose $300 on. It's definitely that whole journey. But I got to be honest, over the last couple of years, I think I started out playing shows and they were pretty bad for the most part. And bad is relative. There's a spectrum, right? But I would say 90% of the shows that I've played in my life, but particularly in these last couple of years, I've gone home and cried because the space between where I was and where I wanted to be and what I knew I had in my potential to share versus what I was able to access during that performance. There was just such a space there, and some of it is just your craft and some of it's mental and emotional, right? But so I've had to go out there and do my 10,000 hours to even get close to where I want to be, and I'm still miles and miles and miles away from, and I'll never get there. But
Steve Salvage, musician, said the nicest thing about you. I thought it was the highest compliment. And somehow he was on in the summer, I think, and Steve plays with Hold Steady, plays with all kinds of superstar.
Yeah.
And he said, somehow your name came up, and he said, well, Cyrena, talk about somebody who puts in the work.
Oh man.
And he meant it just it was just this genuine sort of thing of just doing the work. And in my, like you mentioned books and writing in my other life, there are a lot of people who write a little bit, but they don't, I mean, I'm not naming names. They just don't put in the work. And I remember that when I started writing and when I was getting an MFA and would be around writers in New York. And then it's like, oh, you think a lot about writing and that's fine. And you do a little bit of writing in your diary and or your journal, and that's fine. I don't even mean this as ugly as it comes across, but that's not doing the work. The work is writing and writing and writing. And I think last time you were here, I talked about like the first novel I ever finished. And I was probably in my late 20s. And I worked on that book for years. It was like 26, 27, somewhere like that. And then I had to take a break from it because I was moving to Memphis, and I got it back out and I was reading it. And I was like, oh my God, this is awful.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
I resonate with that.
300 pages and 2.5 years of work.
Yeah.
That is awful. And it was just clear.
And that was that pivotal moment, right? And you had to decide, am I going to keep doing this, or am I going to say, I'm throwing this in the river, I'm throwing this dream in the river, and I'm never looking at it again, right? And you chose to keep doing it because that's you are the true consummate artist.
Well, you're being really nice to me, but you do sort of, well, I'll put it another way. I mean, I did do the work, and I actually pulled stuff out of that and was like, actually, there's some parts and pieces that ended up in short stories and ended up in my second novel. But also in all that time of writing books and not getting them published, and I'm curious if you turn it back to you, there were points of time where I was just like, well, I don't know if I'm going to quit, but I'm just not going to write for a while. Yeah. And I really couldn't live without it. Yeah. It really became clear that I am not a good person when I'm not writing. You wouldn't like me if I weren't. It's like the Hulk thing, it's just, it's not okay. So it's one thing to say, oh, I, sort of valiantly did the work and it was on principle. So it was also like self-preservation. And you strike me as a person, and a lot of the musicians we've had on, Steve, I think. If Steve weren't writing, or playing music, I think there'd be trouble.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. My dad used to always say, trying to keep an artist from being an artist is like trying to hold a beach ball underwater, and it's like, it's going to pop up. Sometimes at really inconvenient or interesting times if it's not allowed to just live up here where we should exist. But no, I so resonate with that sentiment. And first of all, thank you, Steve, for saying that kind thing about me. I think I remember talking to my therapist about this maybe 8 months ago or so, a year ago. And at that time, I was just so hard on myself, which I am all the time. But I was playing shows and continuing to play shows and leaving and having this sort of crisis internally where I was like, I'm just not good enough. And no matter how hard I try, I'm not as good enough, I'm not as good of a singer as so-and-so, and I can't play guitar like so-and-so, and I'm not, pretty enough for this and whatever, all these things. And I was like, I just can't get these gigs where I want them to be. And she was like, then stop doing it. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, what? You can't say that to me. And then, but she brilliantly forced me to go actually, consider whether that's an option or not, or whether I'm just using that as sort of just this, cyclical, nonsense to keep complaining about without having to actually go, okay, you know what? This thing lives inside of me and I can't not do it. Like and just like you said, it's just to face rejection time and time again, and to have to continually sort of reinvent yourself and choose introspection over quitting. If you can keep doing that somewhat naturally, then I think it's in your blood, and you just gotta see it to the end, right? Yeah. Or who knows what else? Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and it's also a curse. And that's it's a complete curse. And I bet this is how you process, the stuff I can't figure out in life, like the bucket full of issues that I have that I haven't been able to resolve. Like I figured out through writing about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, the album, which I know is not, I don't think it's a full personal, like, here's my life story in terms of words. Okay, so it sort of is. But I joked with you, and hopefully I can say this joke again. Sometime in the fall, you sent me a copy because we're going to maybe do this podcast then, but then wait and all that. And I ran into you, shockingly enough, in a coffee shop. And I said, my first reaction is it's lovely and it's cool and it's really well done. I also thought Cyrena needs a hug. And part of it, that was I've joked about this before with you and with Steve, that I listen to a ton of music. I have zero musical ability. And I'm not a person who listens to actual lyrics very much. I listen to the singing and I really like good singing and effect, but I don't listen. But because I knew I was going to be interviewing, I was listening to the lyrics more, and I was like, "Wow, she's got a lot going on."
A little heavy, huh?
Yeah, but I mean, I like heavy, dark things. It's not a criticism, or I wasn't put off by it. But it was interesting, and it is an incredible thing for you to have put yourself or this version of yourself or these windows on yourself out there in these songs.
Yeah, thank you.
So, yeah, we got a couple minutes left. Let me remind everyone, February 1st, 6:30 at the Listening Lab in Crosstown. It'll be you, Matt Ross-Spang, producer, talking about the album, letting me ask you goofy questions. And then you and Joe Restivo are going to play a couple of the songs, and then they'll be playing the album. The album itself will be probably by then available for pre-order, you think?
Yes.
So, give or take? Okay.
Yeah.
And coming out in May. What'd I miss? What else?
I don't know. We'll just keep chatting once this thing's not rolling.
Yeah, all
right,
we can do that.
Save some of it.
Well, people can come February 1st and hear more.
Yeah, my first single will be out in February.
Okay, good.
That.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other musicians, actually, I should have done this sooner,
Yes.
who are on the album. There's a bunch of them.
Unbelievable cast of characters who I get to play with often in my live band. Joe Restivo, as I mentioned, he was a co-writer on most of the songs. Landon Moore, my bass player, is a co-writer on one of the songs as well. Danny Banks plays drums on several tracks. Sean Zorn plays drums on several tracks, as well as Ken Coomer, who is the only non-Memphian who came in from Nashville to play on a couple tracks. Pat Fusco, who I adore so deeply. Jeremy Stanfill, Matt Wilson. Let's see, did I get the whole crew there? I think so. Sam Shoup came in. It was just, we were really, really lucky and blessed to have these guys.
For people who want to keep up with where they can see you live in Memphis or wherever, go to your Instagram. Is that the best place?
Yeah, you can go to serenawages.com or in my Instagram, Cyrena Wages. That's probably your best bet.
I asked you last time and I've forgotten what your first concert was, because I always ask people, what was the first concert you attended?
Ooh, that I saw. I think I had a hard time remembering, but I went to Widespread Panic in the 3rd grade.
Nice.
which is a choice, right?
There you go.
And I'm not like a huge fan either. It wasn't then, and I'm not
just
now,
alone.
to be
just
honest.
got yourself a ticket.
Yeah,
wandered in there with some cigarettes and
caught the bus.
Yeah.
I think my brothers took me or something. They were probably like supposed to be babysitting. My parents left town.
Awesome.
And I ended up
awesome
with,
brother story.
A bunch of hippies at Widespread. It was that, or it might have been NSYNC.
Oh, that's pretty good.
My dad might have taken me to NSYNC for the first concert. It's hard to recall.
We're
a big music family. They took me everywhere.
Okay. That makes a ton of sense.
Lucky.
I asked Steve this and he had an interesting answer, but the music you wish you could play that you can't or perform.
Oh, I wish I could sing soul music.
Yeah.
I wish I think there's a lot of soul in my voice. I think there's something in the water here that just kind of finds its way into artists from this part of the world. But living here and hearing actual soul singers, like I'll go hear Joe Restivo when he plays at BB King's sometimes, and these female powerhouse soul singers that get in there and sing, that just can't be touched by anybody who hasn't lived that life.
Yeah.
Like that's just something magic. I don't even know how to, it's religious experience.
The music you listen to that would just be so embarrassing if people knew. And now I'm asking you to tell about it.
Oh boy. Oh God. As much as I rag on pop country sometimes, occasionally, just like a straight up, 2-chord cheesy country song in the summer that's about trucks and about women in very condescending and bizarre and archaic ways, but still, sometimes they're just bangers. They're just like the melodies. It's horrifying. That's like once every 5 years that I'll.
Last, I think
I'm already embarrassed.
I was thinking about this, and I was going to ask it at the thing on February 1st, but maybe I'll just ask it again. A song you wish you could hear again for the very first time.
Oh my God. Down So Low by Tracy Nelson on the Mother Earth record. When I was, 6, 7, 8 years old. my dad had that vinyl in our like family playroom, and he would play that record, that song all the time. And she has this alto. She played in Memphis recently. Joe got to play with her. I couldn't go. I was so traumatized by not being able to be there. But she has this alto voice, and it's raspy, and it's like really guttural. And there's just a multitude of emotions in her tone. And when my dad would play that for me, I remember going, okay, I want to be a singer. I don't know what that means, but like I feel whatever's coming out of that woman's body. And it just, I mean, I have chills thinking about that song, being a little girl trying to make sense of it, you know?
Yeah, that's great. We're out of time. Cyrena Wages, thanks for being
You're
here
the
again.
Best.
Come out Feb 1st, 6:30 at the Listening Lab in Crosstown. You'll be able to get hear a bunch of the album, then pre-order the album then, which comes out in May. Thanks very much for being here. That is all the time we have. Reminder, Sidebar airs every Thursday on WYXR 91.7 at 11:30. If you missed any of the show today, go to the WYXR app, the Daily Memphian, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.